November 17th, 1989. Hundreds wounded, one presumably dead. The communist regime in Czechoslovakia was drawing to a close.
We always were looking admiringly to America, and that was dream of most of young people, what kind of freedom they have there, and that was our wish, our dream, we could achieve something like that.
The encounter of external geopolitical factors and the rapid procession of events culminating in the Velvet Revolution left the ailing leadership of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia unable to respond to rising popular dissent, and ultimately led to the end of communism in Czechoslovakia. After the Second World War, when Russian tanks came into Czechoslovakia, they were welcomed with cheers and gratefulness for liberating the country from the Nazis. The Communist Party took advantage of that feeling and gained a plurality of 38% in the first post-war elections and formed a coalition government with other left-wing parties. In February 1948, however, the Communist Party staged a coup d'etat and 40 years of totalitarian rule ensued. Czechoslovakia, along with the other Soviet satellite countries, was isolated from the West.
An iron curtain has descended across the continent. Warsaw, Berlin, Prague, and Sofia. All these famous cities and the populations around them lie in what I must call the Soviet sphere.
In 1968, a new generation of the Czechoslovak Communist Party leaders, headed by liberal reformer Alexander Dubček, came to power and pressed for economic liberalization and relaxation of censorship in what became known as the Prague Spring. Freedom of speech and press emerged, and for the first time, political commentary was allowed in the media. Even though Dubček's socialism with the human face policies were popular among the general public, hardline communists, both in Czechoslovakia and the Soviet Union, resisted the changes. To prevent an uprising, the USSR led several negotiations affirming Czechoslovakia's loyalty to the Warsaw Pact. When the reforms continued, the Soviet Union took a military alternative. In mid-August 1968, the USSR and other members of the Warsaw Pact mounted the largest military operation in Europe since the end of the Second World War. 200,000 troops and 5,000 tanks invaded Czechoslovakia with no opposition from the Czech army. Ordinary citizens resisted the invasion, however, painting over the street names and doing anything possible to stop the invaders. Dubček and the other communist reformists were replaced by hardline communists, and an era of ubiquitous state power continued. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, dissidents challenged the government with independent thinking and by embracing Western influences like music and clothes in addition to democratic ideals. Charter 77 was the first organized opposition in Czechoslovakia to encounter the Communist Party, and in 1977 it published a manifesto, along with signatures, in Western newspapers proclaiming their opposition to the government because it didn't protect human rights. The document was banned and the signatories were persecuted. A decade later, in the mid-80s, Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, had enacted his perestroika and glasnost reforms, which sought to overcome Soviet economic stagnation and grant greater freedom. These reforms ultimately contributed to the eventual dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. With the USSR preoccupied with these reforms, and the Iron Curtain crumbling in Poland, Hungary, and Eastern Germany, tension in Czechoslovakia increased as the spirit of revolution encountered the unyielding communist government. But on the 17th of November, 1989, all of the circumstances aligned and set up the path towards change. Students of Prague universities organized a demonstration to commemorate a student being killed in an anti-Nazi protest 50 years earlier. The demonstration was permitted by the authorities because anti-Nazism was in line with the communist historical narrative. On the evening of November 17th, thousands of students marched without incident on the designated route, but as more and more people of all ages joined, the focus of the demonstration shifted to discontent with current politics, and an increasing number of people started holding up anti-government signs and shouting phrases against the leaders of the Communist Party. They peacefully walked with candles, singing songs about freedom and shouting slogans. But soon, the protesters encountered the police, who created a blockade from both sides, preventing them from continuing or leaving.
The space between us was getting to be smaller and smaller. I personally had a feeling I cannot breathe. What should we do? And we cannot leave, we cannot escape. There was no escape. And that was the time when the police started to beat everyone. Everyone was shouting, crying. When we managed to escape, we saw some people laying on the ground, and also there was lots of blood. That was really terrible.
To students who attended the rally and to citizens of Prague, this event seemed monumental because of the unprecedented police brutality. However, because of the state-controlled media, people in the majority of the country were at first skeptical or completely unaware of what had occurred. The following day, the student unions organized a strike for all the Prague universities, and later that day, all the theaters in Prague joined the students to create awareness of what had happened. None of the theaters gave their performances, and instead the audience took part in discussions, sharing their experiences and urging others to protest.
My už dneska nesmíme tu šanci pustit. My musíme věřit. Když ne nikomu, tak tomu občanskému fóru, to je přece strašně rozhodující a důležitá věc, to fórum.
Václav Havel, a playwright and dissident who had only been released from jail a few weeks prior, helped utilize the anger people felt because of the police brutality and long years of a controlling regime and transfer it into something concrete and productive. He combined Charter 77 and other anti-government groups to form the Občanské fórum, or Civic Forum, which was composed of actors, students, dissidents, and ordinary people. The Civic Forum became the platform of opposition to the Communist Party and eventually successfully negotiated a non-violent transition of power. There was a saying popularized by Havel about the length of revolutions in Europe. In Poland it took 10 years, in Hungary 10 months, in East Germany 10 weeks. Perhaps in Czechoslovakia it will take 10 days. Although the complete revolution in Czechoslovakia took longer than 10 days, the spirit of enthusiasm remained. Over the course of the weeks following the demonstration on the 17th, foreign news reporters broadcasted the Velvet Revolution to the entire world. However, in order to let the Czech public know what was happening, the students created pamphlets, leaflets, and posters. The term Velvet Revolution was most likely coined by Western journalists to symbolize a peaceful, negotiated regime change. In Prague, there were daily protests, and communist leaders who encountered resistance among people tried desperately to maintain a semblance of order.
V žádné zemi ani rozvojové, ani v socialistické, ani v kapitalistické neexistuje to, aby 15letí děti určovali, kdy má odejít prezident nebo kdy má přijít a kdo jim má být.
The Czechoslovak Communist Party had observed the crumbling of communist regimes all over Europe, and without the support of the Soviet Union, there was great uncertainty of how to react to the rallying public. People congregated, talked about solutions, and most of all didn't lose hope. At one of the rallies, Marta Kubišová, who had written a song opposing the invasion of tanks in '68, sang the same iconic song about freedom. The song became a staple to this revolution as well, and would be sung many times after. On November 24th, the top leaders of the Communist Party resigned. Without the support of the Soviet Union, and with other former communist countries declaring democracy, the Czechoslovak Communist Party experienced inner turmoil. Along with the inability to form a coherent party and the encounter of nationwide protest, the Communist Party was left with no option but to resign. Gradually, the terms proposed by the Civic Forum were accepted by the government. The political prisoners were released, the government was renewed, and the free elections were planned for the following June.
All the people were dancing there, shouting, really in tears that this really happened and we succeeded.
The communists sensed their defeat, so in December, the parliament unanimously elected Václav Havel, the leader of the Civic Forum and arguably the entire Velvet Revolution, as the president. When the communist regime encountered overwhelming public protest and an uncertain geopolitical climate, it was unable to adapt and was left no choice but to peacefully transition power to the democratic protest movement. The Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, through nonviolent action and mass protest, became the model for other countries which attempted their own revolutions. It became a precedent and showed the true power of the people and what they can accomplish without resorting to violence. Current and future revolutions have the potential to take inspiration from the Velvet Revolution and create a peaceful exchange of power, providing hope for the future of our world.